My name's John, and this story takes place in a quaint town in Pennsylvania called Fairview. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, where the local diner is the heart of the community, and gossip spreads faster than wildfire. I met my wife Jessica here about 12 years ago. We were both in our mid-20s, full of hope and dreams, and the chemistry was instant. We dated for a couple of years before getting married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. Life was simple and sweet. Jessica and I never had kids. It wasn't for lack of trying initially, but eventually we both agreed that maybe it was for the best. She focused on her career as a real estate agent, and I ran a small but successful auto repair shop. We had a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 dogs named Max and Bella, and a seemingly perfect life. Our relationship had its ups and downs like any other, but I always thought we were solid. We communicated well, or so I believed. We shared our dreams, fears, and insecurities late into the night. I felt we had an understanding, a connection that couldn't be easily broken. Little did I know, the foundation of our marriage was crumbling right under my feet, hidden behind Jessica's increasingly perfect facade. For the first 10 years, life was good. Jessica and I had our routines, our date nights, and our spontaneous weekend getaways. But then, slowly, things began to change. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Jessica became more distant, engrossed in her phone, always with some new excuse for why she had to stay late at work. I chalked it up to the pressures of her job and tried to be supportive, giving her the space I thought she needed. Fairview was home to us, a place where we built our life together. The familiar faces, the comforting routines, all contributed to a sense of stability and belonging. But as Jessica's behavior grew more erratic, the town I loved so much started feeling like a prison. Its once comforting familiarity turning into a constant reminder of what was slipping away from me. This is the story of how I discovered my wife's infidelity, how I confronted her, and how I ultimately decided to reclaim my life from the ruins of our marriage. It's a story filled with shock, betrayal, and a painful journey toward understanding and healing. This is my story, told from my heart, with all its raw emotions and unfiltered truths. Looking back, the first signs were there, but I was too blind or perhaps too trusting to see them. Jessica had always been social, but her newfound obsession with her phone and constant texting was hard to ignore. She started coming home later and later, with increasingly elaborate explanations about meetings with clients or last-minute showings. One night, I found myself alone at the dinner table again, pushing my food around my plate. Jessica had called to say she'd be late because of a client who wanted to see a house on the outskirts of town. It was the 3rd time that week. Max and Bella sat by my feet, looking up at me with those innocent eyes, as if they sensed something was wrong. I decided to wait up for her. Midnight came and went, and still, there was no sign of her. When she finally walked through the door at 2 a.m., she looked startled to see me sitting in the living room. Her clothes were disheveled, her makeup smudged. I asked her if everything was okay, and she snapped at me, accusing me of being controlling and paranoid. The next day, I noticed she had changed her phone password, something she had never done before. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying she had read an article about phone security. It seemed plausible, but my gut told me something was off. Her behavior became more erratic over the following weeks. She'd get overly defensive when I asked simple questions about her day. She started taking longer showers and would lock herself in the bathroom for extended periods, her phone always with her. One day, while cleaning the house, I found a hotel keycard tucked away in her purse. My heart sank. I wanted to confront her right then, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if it was all a big misunderstanding? I tried to dismiss my growing suspicions, telling myself that I was overthinking things. But the late-night phone calls, the whispered conversations, and her sudden interest in going out with her friends, more frequently, all pointed to something I couldn't ignore. One evening, while Jessica was out supposedly meeting a client, I decided to check her laptop. She had left it on the kitchen counter, and I hoped to find some clues that would either confirm or dispel my doubts. When I opened her email, I found nothing unusual. But then, I noticed a folder labeled Private tucked away in the corner of the desktop. Inside were dozens of emails and messages between Jessica and a man named Alex. They were explicit, full of flirtatious banter, and worse, detailed plans about their next rendezvous. My hands trembled as I read through the messages. Alex was one of her clients, a wealthy businessman looking to invest in properties in Fairview. Their relationship had started innocently enough, with professional emails and text exchanges, but it quickly escalated into something more, something that shattered my world. Jessica's lies began to make sense. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the constant phone calls, it all pointed to her affair with Alex. I felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over me. The woman I had loved and trusted for over a decade was betraying me, living a double life right under my nose. I spent the next few days in a daze, unsure of what to do. I avoided confronting Jessica, hoping that maybe, somehow, this nightmare would end on its own. But the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. The love notes, the explicit photos, the hotel receipts, it was all there, a painful testament to her betrayal. My suspicions were no longer just suspicions. They were cold, hard facts. Jessica was having an affair, and my world was falling apart. The realization of Jessica's affair gnawed at me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed hard evidence, something undeniable to confront her with. One evening, when she announced she had another late-night meeting with a client, I decided it was time to take action. I followed her. It felt surreal, sneaking around my own town, tailing my wife like some private investigator. She drove to a hotel on the edge of town, the same hotel where I had found the keycard in her purse. I parked a few cars behind her, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked into the hotel lobby, and I saw her greet a man. Alex, the name from the emails. They exchanged a kiss, not the kind you'd expect from a professional relationship, but one filled with passion and familiarity. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to keep it together. I watched as they checked in and took the elevator up. Once they were out of sight, I made my move. I approached the front desk, trying to appear as casual as possible, and struck up a conversation with the receptionist. With a little bit of charm and a story about surprising my wife, I managed to get the room number. I took the stairs, needing the time to gather my thoughts, to steady my nerves. When I reached the floor, I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, listening to the muffled sounds from inside. Laughter, hushed voices, and then unmistakable sounds of intimacy. My blood ran cold. With a deep breath, I knocked on the door. The sounds inside stopped abruptly. I heard footsteps, hushed whispers, and then the door opened slightly, just enough for Jessica to peer out. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me. She tried to close the door, but I pushed it open with more force than I realized I had. There they were, Jessica and Alex, caught in the act. The room reeked of sex, their clothes scattered around the floor. Jessica grabbed a sheet to cover herself, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell are you doing here, John?" she spat, her voice filled with venom. "I could ask you the same thing, Jessica," I said, my voice trembling with rage and hurt. "How long has this been going on?" Alex stood there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. He made a move to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't even try," I snapped. "This is between me and my wife." Jessica's expression changed from anger to something else. Defiance. "What did you expect, John? You're never there. You're so caught up in your work in your little auto shop that you never had time for me." Her words stung, but they also fueled my anger. "So this is my fault? You think this justifies screwing around behind my back?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with a mix of guilt and resentment. I turned to Alex. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. "Now!" He grabbed his clothes and left the room without a word, leaving us in a tense, suffocating silence. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal and confusion. Jessica sat on the bed, clutching the sheet around her, refusing to meet my gaze. "Why, Jessica?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" She sighed, finally looking up at me. "I needed more, John. More than you were giving me. More attention, more excitement, more... everything. Alex gave me that." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So what now?" I asked, feeling utterly defeated. "Do you love him?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it wasn't about love. It was about filling a void." A void. That's all our marriage had become to her. A void that she needed to fill with someone else. The realization hurt more than I could have ever imagined. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't be with someone who would betray me like this." She looked at me, her eyes finally softening. I'm sorry, John. I really am. But I don't think either of us has been truly happy for a long time. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Maybe she was right. Maybe we had both been living a lie, clinging to a marriage that had been dead for years, but knowing that didn't make it any less painful. I'll be at the house tonight, I said, turning to leave. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. As I walked out of the hotel, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. Jessica had cheated on me, betrayed the vows we had made, and destroyed the life we had built together. But amidst all the pain and anger, there was also a small flicker of relief. The truth was out, and now I could start to rebuild my life, piece by painful piece. The drive back home was a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Jessica's defiance, her excuses, the way she tried to shift the blame onto me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of anger, betrayal, and heartache. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, trying to gather the strength to go inside. This was the house where we had shared so many memories, both good and bad, and now it felt like a prison filled with ghosts. When I walked in, Max and Bella greeted me at the door, wagging their tails, oblivious to the turmoil that had just upended their world. I knelt down and petted them, finding a small comfort in their unconditional love. Jessica came home about an hour later. She walked in with a tired, resigned look on her face, as if she was ready for the confrontation that was about to unfold. I was in the living room nursing a glass of whiskey, trying to dull the pain that was threatening to overwhelm me. "John," she said softly, standing in the doorway, "we need to talk." I looked up at her, feeling a surge of anger. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything?" She sighed, sitting down on the couch opposite me. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we can't ignore this. We need to figure out what happens next." I took a long sip of my drink, trying to keep my emotions in check. "How long, Jessica? How long have you been sleeping with him?" She looked down, avoiding my gaze. "A few months." "A few months," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "And all this time you lied to me. You made me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't good enough." "It wasn't about you, John," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "It was about me. I was unhappy, unfulfilled. I needed something more." "Something more," I echoed, feeling a wave of bitterness wash over me. "And you thought screwing around with another man was the answer?" She flinched at my harsh words, but didn't back down. "I know it was wrong, but I was desperate. I felt so alone, so disconnected from you." "Disconnected?" I snapped. "I was here, Jessica. I was always here, trying to make things work, trying to be a good husband. And this is how you repay me?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, John. I really am. But it was more than that. Our marriage hasn't been the same for years. We both know that." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down, I knew she was right. Things hadn't been the same for a long time. We had grown apart, each of us lost in our own worlds, pretending that everything was fine. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want to save this marriage, or are you just looking for an excuse to end it?" She looked at me, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "I don't know, John. I don't know if there's anything left to save." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, what now? Do we just end it? Throw away everything we've built?" She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we need to let go and move on." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of acceptance. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to let go, to stop fighting for something that was already broken beyond repair. "I'll stay at a friend's place tonight," she said, standing up. "We can talk more in the morning." I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. This was the end of our marriage, the end of a chapter that had defined my life for so long. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the beginning of something new. As I sat there in the quiet, empty house, I felt a sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I needed to confront the reality of our failed marriage, to face the pain and the betrayal head on. And then, I needed to find a way to move forward. to rebuild my life from the ashes of what once was. The next morning, Jessica and I sat down to talk. It was a painful, emotional conversation, filled with tears and regret. But it was also honest, and for the first time in a long time, we truly communicated. We both agreed that our marriage was over, that it was time to let go and move on. We decided to file for divorce, to split our assets, and go our separate ways. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. There was no point in holding on to something that was already broken. As we started the process of untangling our lives, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was no longer trapped in a marriage filled with lies and deceit. I was free to rebuild my life, to find happiness and fulfillment on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I knew that I could face whatever came my way, that I had the strength to overcome the pain and the betrayal. And with that hope, I began to take the first steps toward a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and legal meetings. Jessica and I worked with our respective lawyers to sort through the mess of our shared life, dividing assets, deciding who would keep the house, the cars, and even custody of our dogs, Max and Bella, was a painful process. We agreed that I would keep the house and the dogs, while she would take the condo we had bought as an investment property. Our last conversation before the divorce was finalized was one of the hardest moments of my life. It was a rainy afternoon, and we had decided to meet at a small cafe downtown, away from the prying eyes of Fairview. Jessica arrived first, already seated at a corner table when I walked in. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from what I assumed were sleepless nights. I took a deep breath and walked over, feeling the weight of the finality pressing down on me. "Hey," she said softly, offering a weak smile. "Hey," I replied, sitting down across from her. We sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of rain pattering against the windows filling the uncomfortable void. "Have you been okay?" she asked, breaking the silence. "I'm managing," I said, not wanting to delve into the depths of my pain. "How about you?" She shrugged. "It's been tough, but I guess we're both moving forward in our own ways." I nodded, looking down at my hands. "I've been thinking a lot about what went wrong, trying to understand how we ended up here." "Me too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you, John, and I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get so out of hand." I sighed, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "You made your choices, Jessica, and now we're both paying the price." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, and I have to live with that. I hope someday you can forgive me." I looked at her, seeing the woman I had once loved, now a stranger who had shattered my heart. Forgiveness will take time, maybe one day, but right now, I need to focus on rebuilding my life. She wiped away a tear, nodding. "I understand, and I wish you the best, John. Truly." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the weight of our shared past hanging heavy between us. Finally, I stood up, ready to leave. "Take care, Jessica," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "You too, John," she replied, watching me with a look of sorrow and regret. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. Our marriage was over, the papers would be signed soon, and we would go our separate ways. It was a bittersweet ending to a chapter of my life that had been filled with love, pain, and ultimately, betrayal. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later. I stood in the courthouse, feeling a mix of relief and sadness as the judge declared our marriage legally over. Jessica and I exchanged a final brief nod before parting ways, each of us heading toward an uncertain future. Returning to the house, now truly mine, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. The emptiness was palpable, but it was also an opportunity for a fresh start. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the auto repair shop, finding solace in the familiar routines and the satisfaction of fixing things. My friends and family rallied around me, offering support and encouragement. My sister, who had always been there for me, became a constant presence in my life, reminding me that I wasn't alone. She encouraged me to get out, to meet new people, to start living again. One weekend, I decided to take Max and Bella on a hiking trip. The fresh air and the beauty of nature were a welcome escape from the turmoil of the past few months. As I stood at the top of a hill, looking out over the vast expanse of trees and sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was the beginning of my new life, a life where I could find happiness and fulfillment on my own terms. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild. I took up old hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even made some new ones. One evening, while attending a community event, I met Emily. She was warm, funny, and had a smile that lit up the room. We hit it off instantly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope for the future. Emily and I started seeing each other regularly. She knew about my past, about the betrayal and the heartbreak, and she accepted me with all my scars. With her, I found a sense of joy and companionship that I hadn't felt in years. As time passed, I realized that my journey through the pain and betrayal had made me stronger. I had learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own happiness. Jessica's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it had also been a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch with Emily, Max, and Bella at our feet, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had also given me a second chance at happiness. I had survived the storm, and now I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Looking back, I knew that the experience had shaped me into a better, more resilient person. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and ready to build a new life filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. And so, with the past behind me and the future ahead, I took a deep breath, held Emily's hand, and stepped into the next chapter of my life, knowing that I was finally free to create the happiness I deserved.